A good net of Yantiv. We are in isolation, but the truth is that we are with each other, being together with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, who connects everything in the universe. Since the universe is one single formula of divine wisdom, and we are all connected to God, who is the author of that divine wisdom, the manufacturer of the divine wisdom, which is alive. So we are all connected and connected to the whole world. And Shvi Yishol Pesach is not just a celebration of something that happened a long time ago, but we continue to remove ourselves from Egypt. We continue to grow and get out of Egypt. In fact, Mashiach will come, unofficially, will come on the last day of Pesach. That's the reason why the Haftarah of the last day of Pesach talks about Mashiach. And when we are convinced, when we convince ourselves and we realize that the world is an expression of God's wisdom, that it is only God's wisdom that causes everything to be, God's power, and God and his power are one, that there is nothing outside of God, and that everything is a manifestation of God alone in one form or another, so then there are no boundaries, there are no limitations. We are self-limited. We're not limited because we have physical limitations of age or other kinds of limitations and so on, but rather everything is an expression of the divine will, and since it's the divine will, it's unlimited, and therefore there's really no limitation. We are only limited in our mind, but the truth is everything is one. Everything is the way it's supposed to be, and we are supposed to be feeling liberated and excited and one with the all, with God himself. And when we feel this, and when we know this, nothing will stand in our way. And when nothing stands in our way in our own minds, then that is the precursor of the coming of Mashiach. Because Mashiach will come to take us out of our own bondage, our own limits. What does that mean? It doesn't mean that we will change. It doesn't mean that all of a sudden you'll have $1 billion in the bank. It doesn't mean that you're going to go to Mars. It doesn't mean that at all. It means that at that very moment you will feel that everything is irrelevant, that God is everywhere and God is everything, and there are no real limitations. The real reality of all is God himself, and therefore you are no longer limited by your emotions, limited by your own ideas. You're liberated from that. That is an incredible feeling of freedom, and that is exactly how you feel when Mashiach comes. And when you feel that way, Mashiach will be in your place. And then all you have to do is wait for Mashiach to get to the outside world. As they tell the story that they once heard a big noise in the city of Tiberias in Tveria. And Rav Mendel Haradoker, Rav Mendel Vitebsker, asked someone, what's going on? What's the noise? So he says, they're saying that Mashiach has come to Tveria. So Rav Mendel went to the window, took a couple of sniffs in the air, and he says, that's not Mashiach. And he closed the window. So the Rebbe asked Rav Mendel if he knew by sniffing the air whether Mashiach was coming or not. Why did he have to go to the window? He could have sniffed it in his own house. And the answer is because Mashiach was already there in his house. He just wanted to know whether the Mashiach that had been in his house extended to the outside world already. In other words, he experienced Mashiach already. He was outside of the limits of this world and the spiritual worlds, and he was already together with Mashiach, because Mashiach is the liberation from all bonds, from all limitations. And he already was unlimited from that, released from that. He just wanted to know if this was in the outside world as well. One of the customs of Sudas Mashiach, the last meal of Pesach, is called the meal of Mashiach. We wash for matzah and we drink 4 cups of wine. And the Baal Shem Tov says that he who will drink 4 cups of wine, the last meal of Pesach, he promises him that he will merit to see the Mashiach. And that's what we do. And we usually have a whole bunch of people coming, and we usually have family, and usually I tell a story. It's the story of Reb Shmuel Batshaikover and the Jews of Batchaikov. This story was told to the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe in 1895. That's 125 years ago. It was published for the first time in 1943. 77 years ago. And every year that I've been here in Farmington Hills, I've told this story. I've told the story now for about 42 years. So I want to tell you the story of Batshaikov right now. There was a little village in Russia. It was part of the holdings of a baron, a Graf. He was a fine man, and he treated Jews and non-Jews equally. He allowed people to have good terms on his estate as long as they were honest and hardworking. He let Jews have opportunities just like non-Jews, and he was very fair. Whoever gave him the best price, he awarded the contract. And Jews were able to live in his area, and they lived quite well, despite the fact that in Tsarist Russia, there was a lot of anti-Semitism, but he couldn't tolerate it. He wouldn't tolerate it, and he treated everyone, Jew and non-Jew, equally. He allowed the rabbis and the religious teachers rights to have their animals graze in his pastures for no charge. He gave them other breaks because knowing that they were God's people working for God, so that they should have certain things easier for them. But then he got old, and he couldn't take care of his estate. He looked for a manager. Who could he get as a manager? He got an ex-military man who was organized, efficient, knew how to run things. But the Russian military was rabidly anti-Semitic. And this manager hated Jews. At the same time, a new Galach, a new priest, came on the scene who was equally rabidly anti-Semitic. And between the manager and the priest, they planned how to destroy the livelihood of the Jews in the village of Batshaikov. The Jews in Batshaikov were quiet people. They stoically accepted everything that went their way. They never complained. The only thing that they would ask of the Lubavitcher Rebbe, they were chassidim of the Rebbe, was that their children go in God's ways and that they should be well and healthy. And once a year before Shavuos, they would all gather together in the home of Reb Shmuel Batshaikover. He was a merchant, dealt in precious stones, and he was independently wealthy, and therefore he was not subject to the machinations of the Graf or his staff. So they would come to Reb Shmuel Batshaikover, and they would verbring for a couple of nights in a row. Of course, they davened there, but they verbring, they said l'chaim, and they commiserated in their commitments to each other and to God and to Torah. And at the end of the 24, 48-hour period, they would write their notes and send their notes with Reb Shmuel, because they couldn't afford the travel, because it's a long way. And he would bring their notes to then the Rebbe Marash. The livelihood of the people in Batshaikov had dwindled to the point where they were almost beyond despair. They didn't think that things could get any worse. All of those that had had leases or contracts with the Graf's estate lost them. People didn't know where their next meal was going to come from. They borrowed and ate and worried that they wouldn't be able to live the next month or two. That's how bad it was. Reb Shmuel Batshaikover would travel to the Rebbe Marash on Shavuos for the Shavuos holiday, and would stay in Lubavitch for a few days and then come back. That year, I believe it was 1881, Reb Shmuel Batshaikover went to Lubavitch, and as soon as he got to the Rebbe's grounds, the Chotzer, he heard an announcement from one of the Rebbe's secretaries: Shmuel Batshaikover is requested to enter the office of the Rebbe now. This was shocking to Shmuel. He thought that it would take a few days till he saw the Rebbe. He went into the Rebbe's office with trepidation, and the Rebbe asked him, "Was Herzach and Batshaikov? What's going on?" And then Shmuel began to open up that it's tragic. The Jews in Batshaikov are at the verge of collapse, complete economic collapse. They haven't had any sources of income for months. Those who had leases or expired lost them. Those who were hired by the Graf's estate lost their jobs, lost their livelihood. They cannot fish or trap, do anything in the area. They don't know where to go. The rest of Russia is a hotbed of anti-Semitism. They had a little bit of savings, and those savings are almost gone and depleted, and they don't know what to do. So the Rebbe Marash said, I know about what's going on, because my doctor is the same doctor who treats the Graf. He told me that the Graf is very sick and has had to give it over to his estate, to a manager. But Shmuel, why didn't you tell me earlier? Why did you wait until everything almost collapses? Why didn't you write? You've been coming here for so many years. Why weren't you on the cutting edge and dealing with what's going on in Batshaikov? I want you to immediately go back. I don't want you staying here. Come back to Batshaikov now. And as soon as you can, go see the Graf and tell him, I know that he is dangerously ill, deathly ill. But I am giving you my promise that for every Jewish family that the Graf will provide livelihood for, I promise him, no strings attached, with a month of good health You won't have to even go to a doctor. That's my promise to him. Go there immediately and tell him this. Shmuel turned around, got the next wagon, immediately traveled back to Batshaikov. And the next morning, he went to the home of the Graf. Knocked on the door. It wasn't early morning, it was mid-morning, at a time that he could get visitors. He knocked on the door and they said, "Oh, who are you?" I said, "My name is Shmuel Batshaikover. My friend of the Graf, I want to see him." And they said, "I'm sorry, the Graf is just too ill to see people." Reb Shmuel left the door, but he stayed in his carriage, hoping he might get a glimpse of the Graf, either through a window or some other mechanism. But he had his responsibility. He had a shlichus. The day was a balm, warm day with very little wind. The doctors of the Graf said he has a beautiful pine forest. Today would be a good day for him to get some fresh air. Let's take him on a bed in his wagon and drive him through the pine forest, and he'll enjoy it. It'll be good for him. So, around 9 o'clock, about an hour later, they took the Graf out on a bed to his wagon to take him on a trip in through the forest that he owned. Reb Shmuel noticed the Graf, saw how frail he was, and felt badly for him, knowing that he was a good man, and such a good man should be so sick and so frail. The Graf noticed him and said, waved to him to come onto his wagon. Reb Shmuel didn't need any other hint. He just immediately jumped onto the wagon, and as soon as he could, told the Graf that he has a message for him from the Rabbiner, from the Lubavitcher Rebbe. The Rebbe says, "I know that you're sick, and that the doctors have given up hope for you to survive the sickness. The Rebbe said to you that I promise you that for every Jewish family that you will provide livelihood for, I promise you for every family a month of good health." The Graf immediately, his eyes lit up, and he told Shmuel, "Listen, I want you to make a survey of all the Jews living in Batshaikov and all those who possibly live around here who could be employed. I want you to give me all of their names and vitals quietly, and I'll take care of it." Shmuel went around. He found that there was more than 12 dozen Jewish families living in Batshaikov, and another couple of dozen in the area surrounding Batshaikov that could have some benefit from working for the Graf. He brought their names in the list to the Graf. The Graf immediately fired his manager, and once again, the Jews in Batshaikov were given the opportunities to earn a livelihood, and again, their fortunes turned, and they were able to support themselves and their families. In 1895, the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe was a boy of 15, and he went to the gravesite of his grandfather, and great-grandfather, the Rebbe Marashin at Tzemach Tzedek, and he noticed Reb Shmuel Batshaikover was there at the gravesite of the Marash, wondering why he went directly to the cemetery instead of going to his father, the Rebbe Rashab, the Lubavitcher Rebbe then. Reb Shmuel answered him and told him the entire story, and concluded with these words: since that morning, it has been more than 14 years. The Graf has been healthy and has never needed to see a doctor. A couple of days ago, he felt a little bit of a weakness, and so he called me in and told me, according to his account, the Rebbe Marash owes him 14 more months of good health. And since he feels weak, he wants the Rebbe to fulfill his promise. So he sent me here to pray at his gravesite. According to that, the Graf of Batshaikov supported 182 families with livelihood. And for that he was given 182 months of good health. How profound, how important it is to provide a livelihood for others and to provide for their health. May it be God's will that all those who are sick should be healed, including the Satmar Rebbe and his family and his attendant, and my Mechuten, Zev ben Rickel, my dear friend Reb Yoel ben Tamar, and all those who suffer from the coronavirus, the COVID-19, should have a refuah shlema within the next 24 to 48 hours. Have a good Yom Tov.